My name is Jamie Jury, and I want to thank you so much for coming to my presentation on communicative competence. There are 4.8 million ELLs in the United States, representing 10% of all learners enrolled in public education. Now, we need to ensure that all learners have the communicative competence to interact with the surrounding world and reach their full potential. And I put this picture up here because I think about all the communicative competence, which represents the speaking and writing parts of language. And I think about the roads and the buildings and the schools and the apartments and all the communication that needed to take place to be able to build this, even down to the headlights in the cars. And without language, this would have been a very difficult task to do. So we can accomplish helping our ELLs gain communicative competence through student-centered classrooms. And we'll talk a little bit more about communicative language teaching and task-based language teaching in this presentation. Del Hymes created the theory communicative competence, and it was founded in 1972. He theorized that Chomsky's term competence was too narrow and it needed expanded because it didn't include the social and functional rules of language needed for full competence, for full understanding of how we interpret messages, how the patterns and language, the patterns of use, social linguistics, social cultural, so many different aspects were not included in Chomsky's term for competence. Hymes talked a lot about the ability to actually use the language for meaningful interaction with others. And this theory, Hymes gave a presentation during a keynote speech that I found and was able to read. And he said, imagine that the only language in the country was English, even standard English. Situations, roles, activities, personal characteristics such as age and sex would affect and shape the ways in which we use language. So if you look at the picture on the right, imagine a child in school, how they would use language, or a construction worker, or a CEO. There's lots of different ways that language is used. Pragmatics and styles. So there's a plethora of information that, different ways in which we can dissect language. So this theory came about, from the transformative, generative, and the ethnography of communication. And what that means is like patterns in speech and, what are those foundational pieces needed. So, but not only that, one of the things I found so interesting is during this time, it was presented first in the late 60s. During that time, it was, the war on poverty, the height of the civil rights movement, and the first year of Head Start. So really moving into a historical part in history that really shaped, and it also shaped the influence and how this theory was received. So how do we develop this communicative competence in our students? Well, Canal and Swain developed a framework in the 1980s that was very clear, concise, and had the components of communicative competence that I really liked. So in their framework, they had 3 different categories. First, they had knowledge, language use, and compensatory strategies. So under the knowledge category were the forms of language, the morphology, syntax, semantics, phonology, and the strategies of grammatical competence. Under the language use category, they had the rules of discourse, the patterns of use for sociocultural, social linguistics. And I really like that they said the knowledge of these rules will be crucial in interpreting utterances for social meaning, particularly when there's a low level of transparency between the literal meaning of an utterance and the speaker's intention. So for example, I'm a mother. So if I look at my child and say, that's wonderful, what does that really mean? Is my intention to say, oh, great job? Or is my intention to say, I'm not really happy with that decision and maybe we'll talk about it later? More of a sarcastic kind of intention. So that's what I was going for, kind of with my nonverbal behavior and with my tone. So the next category they had was compensatory strategies, and in this they describe it being verbal and nonverbal communication strategies that enhance the overall effectiveness of the communication. And I know I've personally used this in Spanish. If I didn't know a word, I would talk around the word, describe the word, try to find a different word. Also, maybe avoid a topic, ask for clarification. So there's a variety of different strategies that students can use to enhance their overall effectiveness of that communication. This look in the classroom. Well, in the 1970s, communicative language teaching, it had been the prevailing approach to pedagogy that was widely accepted. Littlewood discusses that the definition of communicative language teaching, and you may see this a lot as CLT, it was open to it had diverse interpretations, varying definition, but it was overall designed to engage learners, be authentic and meaningful in its functional use of language. Fluency and accuracy are secondary to the actual communicative techniques, and it's important for students using the language productively in unrehearsed contexts. But Littlewood did to say that this is not really as much of an approach anymore, as it is like an umbrella to describe the framework of teaching communicative competence. And now if you look at like the approach, for the last like 20 years, it's mostly been task-based learning teaching, which is TBLT. So there's a variety of ways that curriculum developers, administrators, teachers, we have a lot of options of how does this look in our classroom. Well, this is a student-centered approach that uses task or authentic activities to enhance the second language acquisition of our learners, and it fulfills a fundamental need for successful communication. So looking at TBLT, let me switch sides. So task-based language teaching, Brown refers to Skehan's definition of a task as being the meaning in a task is primary. It gives students the opportunity to solve a problem. It needs to be authentic, and it needs to relate to the students' experiences, and there has to be an objective with measurable outcomes so we can see are our tasks working to develop that communicative competence that we're hoping for in our students. So Courtney, I read this article with activities to activate and maintain a communicative classroom written by Mr. Courtney. And he talks about we need the tasks to be fun to help reduce the stress, and it may increase intrinsic motivation. Again, they have to be meaningful and allow students to be the experts to solve the problem, focusing on sharing ideas. And grammar is really secondary or implicit in these types of activities. They need to be interactive because it promotes fluency when the students speak, and it increases efficacy over time of their speaking. It's great to keep them routine and frequent because it allows for easier implementation and allows for teachers to increase their goals over time. And a variety of ideas for tasks can be like group work and pair work, informational gap activities, paragraph writing, discussions, negotiation, narration. Again, this is primarily focusing on the speaking and writing domains. One of the activities I really wanted to share with you guys is it's an informational gap activity, and it's called I'm Not Just a Number. So the objective is focusing on question formation for students, because sometimes our ELLs have difficulty, with word order or kind of understanding, like when we ask how many or how long or how old. So this activity, they say, Courtney describes putting 4 different numbers that are meaningful to a student or to a teacher, recommends modeling it first. So this is me modeling my numbers. And so he said, like, depending on the levels of the students, you can scaffold by putting key words that, kind of almost like a word box with the answer, so they can kind of try to formulate and piece them together. So 2012, my modeling is when did you? So when did you? And they can kind of through discussion throw out answers. I could write a list if I wanted to, but yeah, 2012. So that is actually the year when did you get married. So how many? So they would have to look at those number, or the number three, how many, what would be important in my life? So they can go through these questions and discuss and model those types of activities. But the important piece here is actually giving papers to your students. So you've modeled this. Maybe, if depending on your level of your students, you could have a word wall or a question wall, some type of chart for lower level students that might need that extra help. Higher level students, you can pair students with different abilities so that they can learn from each other, negotiate that meaning together, help each other out, come to the right answer. But he is saying, Courtney is saying, that give each person a paper, let them draw their own numbers, kind of formulate their questions in their mind of what this means to them. And then you group them together, and they really have to figure out and ask each other these questions and use the language in an authentic way. So this would be a really good example of a task, and then you can review as a class, or depending what your objectives are there. So yeah, just one really good example of a task-based learning that, I mean, it can be manipulated in many different ways depending on the levels of the students. So in conclusion, communicative competence is really, it has a framework that has been instrumental in influencing second language acquisition and communicative language teaching. It is to meet the needs of the students in a meaningful, authentic, and context-based way. We really want to promote the communicative skills for our students so they can have that job that they want, so they can, participate in the community, the sports, develop relationships. So many things, go into how communication affects their life. And our students are living in an environment where the need for language has never been greater. So as TESOL teachers, we can strategically implement task-based learning teaching for our students to help them succeed. I thank you so much for your time, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and thank you again for watching.